Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like if you ball your fist up for a long period of time. I mean, that it's hard then to open it up, and so that's I'm a guy who has done a lot of boxing, and so spent a lot of time with my hand in the fist. And what I'll tell you is, the older I get, the harder that is. And the reason is because our body just starts to behave the way that we tell it to behave for so long. And so if we have these wounds or trauma that we're not dealing with, we're kind of living in protection of the wound as opposed to living kind of fully the way we need to.
Hi, and welcome back to Old School. Today is our teacher in class. We have Jason VanRuler. I have been following him on social media because I saw him on my writing coach, Bob Goff's podcast, and it piqued my interest in the subject matter. And then I've been following him on Instagram. I'm not a stalker, but he had some really genuinely good advice and counsel. He is a therapist in regard to like emotional wound healing and that process. His book, Get Past Your Past, was it's just very interesting, the process that he walks the folks he works with through, but it was his process. So we're really going to have a good time in class today, getting to hear his story and hear his process and his journey. So let's welcome Jason to class.
Okay, well, I can do that. Yeah, so my story is this. I was born and raised in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Parents divorced at age 8, so had this really idyllic childhood until about age 8, and then everything changed, right? And so when their relationship ended, that meant a number of changes were going to come in my life. And so did that transition into living, between two different houses, and it really just upset any routine or expectation I had of childhood. And throughout the rest of childhood, there was abuse and trauma that happened. So I kind of went from like, this is how it's supposed to be, to this is not how it's supposed to be. And so I came out of childhood pretty wounded, having gone through, some things that were very traumatic to me, and some abuse. And I always am careful with that, because I don't think my story is any bigger or worse than other stories. I know a lot of people have stories, but for me, it really left me wounded. And so I left high school and graduated, and kind of did the thing we do where we go, I'm never going to come back again. I'll never be like this. Everything's going to be different. You'll see. Kind of one of those real cinematic moments. And being really transparent, a couple years later, I was in the same spot. I had dropped out of college. I was struggling financially. I didn't really have direction. I was doing a lot of the same things, using alcohol too much, doing a lot of the same things that I had sworn off, that I had seen before. And just had this moment where, and it's a little cliche, but like I literally just saw myself, and I was like, you're the thing you didn't want to be.
Hmm.
But now it's your thing, not theirs, right? So I think there's a season.
Humility.
Yeah, there's a season as a child where you can say like, hey, it's not me, it's my parents. But I kind of got to this place where I went, no, it actually is me. Like there is really nobody to point the finger at, because I created this for myself. And I would love to say, well, Michele, that moment changed everything, and the next day I was a different person. I'm a slow learner, so I was not immediately a different person, but a seed was planted. And so what happened is I started to wonder what it would be like to be better. And then I had the wonderful blessing of meeting my wife, and she was just such an instrumental person in my development and change, because she loved me well, but also held me accountable. So she sort of said like, "Hey, this is great, and I want to be with you. I want to be married to you, and we can do better."
Right.
And so that little bit of encouragement and support, that Michele, that really just like poured lighter fluid on the fire that was already built. And so from there, I had been an owner of a recruiting company, and I said, I think I just want to be a therapist. It had been a dream, if you can believe this, that I had journaled about when I was 8.
Oh, wow.
So I actually have the journal, and I always tell people that I wanted to be a therapist mostly because I always dressed like one, and my career options were limited. So I already had the corduroys, I already had the penny loafers. I was there.
Patches on the elbow.
Yeah,
Nice.
there was not far to go. So no one was terribly surprised. But then I went to school and became a therapist, and have gotten the privilege and honor of doing a lot of different work. I worked in the legal system. I worked with a lot of severe trauma. I worked with the relationships and leaders. And so over the course of my career, it's just been really cool to see God show up. And in those moments, it's really developed my faith, because I've had so many moments with clients where it would just be impossible to think it's not a God thing.
Absolutely. Well, and I love what you said about not the next day, all of a sudden, some kind of I dream a genie, you're all fixed.
Yeah.
Because I talk about that in my story is two-part memoir, and it was a lot of trauma. My family, my parents divorcing was actually a good thing for us because there was an idyllic before that, and there was an idyllic after that. But nonetheless, um, I don't believe that. I mean, I believe in miracles and I believe God is still in the miracle business. But I think my miracle or my healing, and I think a lot of people's healing, is an over time thing. It
Yeah.
is so that that journey can be imparted on others. And I honestly believe that the best therapists, counselors, have had that experience. I'm not saying you can't be one and not have gone through a bunch of trauma, but I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who hasn't gone through something anyway. But I think when we sit down, and there have been a lot of times where I've talked to people who went to their pastor and their pastor's wife and what have you to have some counseling, and they kind of led a really great spiritual, not overly sinful lifestyle. Not that they were sin free, and that person didn't feel like heard, if you will, or like understood maybe as much. And so I agree. I mean, I think that's fascinating that at 8, when you were still at the idyllic point, that you wanted to do this. But I think that's what every bit of between 8 and now was about for you.
Yeah, I clearly did not understand the cost of the education. Had I really grasped that, I might have done something. I might have said something different. Astronaut or something. But
Go be
but
a
I'm with you.
plumber.
I mean, yeah, boy, that would have been easier. I mean, I think as like a therapist, the people we help most are the people we once were. And
Right.
and so if we have been a person who just hasn't needed a lot of help or hasn't had a lot of hard things, I think our pool of people that we can help is probably smaller.
Sure.
And that's not to say anything bad about somebody, but it's just to say, like, yeah, to your point, if you don't get it, it's hard to relate to.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like when people go to like a funeral, and like, what do you say? Like, be present, give that person a hug, but saying, I understand what you're going through if you've never lost a spouse or a child or what have you. And I don't, I like authenticity and I like transparency. And those are the people that I've been drawn to with this podcast, and even conversations about my story is people look at me and think, how could you have gone through that and you are like you are? And I mean, humor is clearly uh, a mechanism for me. In fact, Bob Goff's nickname for me was Sassy Sage because he couldn't
Okay.
really say the words that I really am, kind of a smart aleck.
Sure. I like that.
But nonetheless, you do what you do to move along. And of
Right.
course, absolutely, after a certain point in time, I become responsible for taking those wounds and making decisions through those lenses. And so I understand completely. And as I was reading your story, I got your book, Get Past
Okay.
the
Awesome.
Science.
Yeah. I love
I
it.
have some very specific questions.
Okay. I
And
am
I've
ready.
loved all the stuff that you talk about in regard to like relationships and how we work with what our past is. And I know when you say my story isn't necessarily this or that, but it's your story and
Right.
everyone has one. And
Yep.
so I love that because your transparency and your willingness to kind of lay it out there and not make it sound like it's this world ending situation, but it is our trauma and our wounds. And now what are we going to do about that so that we don't keep looking like we don't want to look in the mirror? And
Yeah.
I feel that way, but more because of the wrinkles that are looking back at me the older I get.
Feel like I would like to change as well. Yes. Well, I've also been through that. It's moisturizer. It's really moisturizer and eye cream has done a lot for me. So I'm on board.
As a
Yeah.
bookkeeper, I do trade. So I trade for my hair, and I have two injector girls. So I get filler, I get a little Botox. So
I need to
I
switch
am
it
not
up.
ashamed.
That is, I need to make some changes around here. I like that.
Hey, I guarantee you could find some people for those services to barter with as for
Yeah.
therapy.
Little therapy trade. I like this.
Oh, it's awesome. It's
Yeah.
awesome. I wish I could find like a handyman and a mechanic. Although I do have a handyman who I did his tax returns, and so I was able to barter that. But handyman stuff costs way more.
It's true. Yep. Definitely.
Well, like I said, I've enjoyed, it's hard on social media for like snippets to really land a plane a lot, and yet I do feel like a lot of the things that you've said aren't trite little sound bites. I really do appreciate them. In your book, you talk about like your journey, your process. I have a process that the Holy Spirit led me through, and I call it Holy Spirit triage. But I found that a lot of those steps are very similar to what you're kind of talking about, only you come at it from a little bit of a different tack. And so, what I'd like, I don't, without giving away the farm, people can go buy your book and I'll have
Sure.
all
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
information. But can you tell me about coughing and what that means and how you do it or spot it? Because it sounds to me like it can happen and you're just not aware that that happened. So, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm really kind of, using that language to describe is that moment of kind of speaking the truth or sort of letting someone into the thing we've held deeply that we haven't discussed yet. And so I kind of compare it to like if you've ever had to cough and you held it back, just the feeling that gives us, and that is a feeling of tension and it's a feeling of discomfort. I was recording a video series with somebody and I had to cough and I held it back and I had tears coming down my eyes because I was just trying so hard not to interrupt the live broadcast. And so in that moment, that's all I could think about was the thing, right? Is all I could think about is what I needed to do that I wasn't doing. And so coughing really, when we talk about past wounds and trauma, is saying the thing, letting it out. Because in that moment, we are actually able to do something with it. We're not able to do anything with it if we hold it back. But what I've learned about some people is that some people wait their whole lives to do that, or maybe they never do that. And
Mm.
so the first step of healing is really to let that out as best we can. Usually it comes out pretty messy. It is not usually a refined story like you or I might tell about our healing. It's the raw, unedited stuff.
When writing my book, the first one is Butterfly Stitches, The Metamorphosis of Healing, which is seasons from when I was younger. And the second one is called Out Loud, The Sound of Healing, for that exact reason. Is that the first step, at least for me, was getting my story out. Whether I believed at the time that the Lord was just asking me to do it for me, which was more comforting. I turned into Moses when he told me I was going to have to say it out loud to the rest of the world. I was like, "Ah!" But there was my editor recommended this book to me called The Memoir Project. It's a little skinny book, and this lady has an actual algorithm for memoirs, which is pretty wild. And she says the first thing you need to do is what she called a vomit draft, where you're not editing, you're not self-editing, you're not worrying if your abusers are looking over your shoulder, you're just getting it out. And that sounds exactly like what you're saying is just let cough. It's ugly, but it's out and it's down on paper. And now you can genuinely see what you were trying to hold in.
Yeah, because I mean, if you think about it, even like sickness, you can get pneumonia if you hold it in, right? So it's
Right.
like we have to get this out. I mean, even when it comes to just bodily sickness, you get it out, you don't keep it in. And so I think that is a bit of a prayerful act because when we do that best, it is a bit like a prayer, right? It's sort of showing up and saying, God, I don't know what sense you'll make of any of this or how this story will change or be refined, but this is it as I've considered it and as I've experienced it.
Exactly. Like we're told, we have an intercessor when we can't come up with the words, when we just don't know what to say or even how to pray it. But I'm here and I'm, humbling myself and I'm just getting it out. And what do you need me to do from here? And we have our part to play to make sure that that moves along. But absolutely, I think until we're just really authentic and get it out, it's kind of hard to work with that. And people don't realize how impactful it is to the other areas of our life, our bodies, our I just went to did this episode called the physical on my podcast, and I went to this chiropractor who's a Christian, and the original purpose of chiropractic was actually spiritual and physical. And so that's where he comes from. But he does this nerve test, and my body was just like, I think I'm pretty healthy. I've stopped bad oils. I'm a carnivore, all these good things. And he had this inflammation. Well, after hearing my story, he and my naturopath were like, well, you've lived with some level of fear your whole life. So that is just what's registering off of your nervous system. And people don't think about it. They genuinely don't. They'll say to somebody who seems pretty healthy, well, you're really healthy. You don't deserve to have cancer. Well, it's not like that's how it works. It works because something you've done or not done is impacting your body. And it can very well be what we hold in, I think.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like if you ball your fist up for a long period of time. I mean, that it's hard then to open it up, and so that's I'm a guy who has done a lot of boxing, and so spent a lot of time with my hand in the fist. And what I'll tell you is, the older I get, the harder that is. And the reason is because our body just starts to behave the way that we tell it to behave for so long. And so if we have these wounds or trauma that we're not dealing with, we're kind of living in protection of the wound as opposed to living kind of fully the way we need to. So I always talk about it like a sunburn. And if you're me, I'm sunburned easily, right? So I'm sitting in front of a window right now. I'm probably sunburned. I should be slathered in SPF 50. But if you get sunburned, like on your shoulders, for instance, and you put a t-shirt on over it and your friend doesn't know, inevitably someone puts their hand on your shoulder and you have what? You have a really big reaction. Well, why did you do that? Well, because it hurt. Did your friend mean to hurt you? No, but they didn't see the wound. And so what happens if we don't deal with it is we end up spending a lifetime of hoping people don't get close enough to bump into the wound.
Hmm. Or that they don't know it's there
Yeah,
and they keep doing it and we keep holding them responsible for hurting us and they had no idea.
correct. Or we have big reactions, right? So sometimes I'll work with somebody and they'll say, yeah, I don't know what happened. They said this or this occurred. And then I blew up, right? And it's like, well, I can always tell you what happened. If the blow up is bigger than the situation or circumstance, it's connected to a wound.
Right. Right. Yeah, I've had people have talked to me. My second book goes into the period of time where I was married. It's not about my marriage and it's not about my ex-husband, but he's included in there. And there was a lot of infidelity that finalized our divorce. But I hadn't prayed about whether I should date him, move in with him, marry him. So I do not dump the responsibility for our marriage failing on in his lap. I mean, its ultimate demise was because he wasn't going to stop cheating, and so there was just nobody. I can't be the only one fighting for the relationship. But it's interesting because people didn't realize that he didn't. I hadn't even told him everything that's in my first book, if you will, like what I had gone through. He knew that my biological father had beaten me, but he didn't know all this other stuff. So there was just a whole, I mean, he was cheating from the time I met him. So that wasn't started because of some behavior of mine, and a lot of people love to do that. And especially in the Christian community, bless their heart, loves to say, well, what did you do? Were you not available or did you do X, Y, and Z? And I was like, so, taken aback. Like you said, your reaction can be overwhelming because you haven't addressed that wound.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, people have to earn that. I'm a big believer in not everybody gets access to those wounds in that story. You have to be safe, and not everyone will. And like you said, that's on them. That's their decision, and it's on us to have those boundaries and standards that we hold. And just not everyone's going to be a person to see that because it matters, because that's part of who we are.
Yeah, to be honest, when there was that lack of trust, like out of the gate, that is an area where I didn't want the wounds torn open, if you will, or new ones created, which, he did do that too. But you're right. I was like you were talking about with protecting that wound, and you're a boxer, or I feel like that. I feel like I'm deflecting punches because I don't want to tell people about the wound, but I also don't want to have them, press on it.
Yeah. So we just end up living a life of protection. And
Yes.
and so, protection, when we live protected, we don't realize potential. And so that's where it just sort of runs out, is that at some point we go like, hey, I want to live to my potential, but to do it, I can't always live protected. And that's the hard thing, is then we need to be surrounded by a community of safe enough people to take that risk. And sometimes, people just aren't. They're surrounded by people who maybe aren't so safe, or they've picked people who never bump into the wound because the people aren't available. That's kind of one I'll see a lot with relationships, is if you're really hurt or wounded, the safe bet is to pick someone unavailable, because the unavailable person is never going to challenge you to let them in. They don't want to be let in anyway.
Right. Right. Yeah, I found that I also, when I have the people around me that, like you said, don't pick at the wound. I'm an Enneagram 7, and so I am an avoidant person, probably. I haven't really done any testing about that, but I do see myself looking for the next enjoyable experience while avoiding that pain. And that has been the Holy Spirit's heaviest load with me.
I like how you put that. Yeah, I get it. That's fun to be challenged that way.
Well, and then that leads into my next question that I was reading in the book, is even prior to COVID, but since COVID, it's been more predominant for me. Like, as I was going through my divorce, most of the people I knew were married couples. And it felt like they all just didn't know what to say, or didn't want to invite me because I'd be a third wheel and they didn't want me to feel like that. Whatever. I'm not blaming them or what have you, but it just started to, like, community isolate. Then I chose to not even worry about it and self isolate. And then COVID happened, and I'm like, okay, now I'm really
You're expected to
getting to go to
isolate. That's
church, all of this stuff. So I was very interested in the chapter, I think it's called No More Isolation. Yeah. Where you talk about not fitting the jersey.
Yeah, I mean,
Talk a little bit about that.
yeah, we talk a little bit about kind of the chameleon syndrome, and kind of this idea of I'll be whoever you want me to be, because that doesn't cause problems. And so if we're not careful, we sort of curate this life and these relationships where it's just a series of expectations people have about how we're supposed to show up, and our job is to show up. And so at the end of the day, when we run into problems or we start to deal with the messy stuff, what we find is we sometimes don't have a lot of people left, because a lot of the people just were more in, and our, we're responsible for our role, which is kind of teaching them that was how it was supposed to be. But then when we're authentic, sometimes we find people who say, well, I didn't really want that. I was kind of more comfortable when you just were the person I wanted you to be. And so it's, how do I develop a community of people who love me for me, that I love for them?
Right.
And that's not always something that we're just inherently born with or naturally gifted at. We have to work at it.
Well, I call myself, people think because I'm chatty with my friends or when I'm in a smaller group, but I'm more of an introverted extrovert. I mean, if I had to walk into a room with even 20 people that I didn't know anybody in there, you're going to find me with my back against the wall, holding my beverage, just kind of observing. And I'm learning to do better than that and, like, put myself out there a little bit. But you're right. Being around a group of people where I've discovered in my healing, I'm the one who thinks I'm an imposter, but I was putting it on them to let myself off the hook. So, I can't show up if I've already given myself an out to not show up authentically. And then I'm blaming them. And there are some people in my universe who clearly, as I started to heal, fell off. And, and the Lord has helped me with that, because who won't leave me and won't forsake me is Him. And I call that my board of directors meeting in the morning, my prayer time with the Holy Spirit, my Abba Father, and my King Jesus. After that, I'm not going to take horizontal voices as my go-to or my mission, but I know we have to interact. That's why we're left here. And I know that we can, if we're not hugging somebody periodically, or, even telling each other, hey, I love you, hey, are you good? Like genuinely, we're like that house plant that never gets any water or sunshine and nobody ever talks to it. We're going to just wither off. I tease my daughter when she comes by. She moved out in January, and she'll come by and I say, you have to hug me for 20 seconds, because they say if it's not at least 20 seconds, the person will wither away. And she's just like, you had to make it weird.
He's like, I was going to give you 18, 20 is the tall order. Best I can do is 19. That's all you're getting. 19 is good.
And she's not a hugger, and I used to be, but in college I was a hugger. I had come out of my high school church group, and people considered a woman who went around hugging people, they had other names for somebody who does that, and that devastated me. And turned me into less of a hugger as I grew up.
Well, but to your point, and even what we're talking about is those kind of those painful situations and circumstances. They kind of shape how we show up,
Sure.
and so we kind of have to learn, like, do the rules still apply, and do I want them to still apply, or do I need to change my community? And so I think growth costs us something, and sometimes the cost is a relationship. Because sometimes people aren't willing to change with us or to accommodate that. And that doesn't make them bad people. It's just growth requires change, not just the change we want, but change across the board.
Right. And it's so funny, because I've heard people who are getting divorced, in the media or whatever, or even people with skin on around me, that'll say they changed. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but you're saying that like that's a bad thing. And you married in your 20s and you're now in your 50s. Did you really want him to stay like that? I mean, I'm like, isn't change a good? I mean, I get it if they do bad change, but there ought to be some change. You know what I mean?
And you would hope I think the thing we want to do well is just invite people along with, right? So if we're changing, the task we have is just, hey, do you want to come with? And you can opt in or out. And sometimes there's a lot of grief about people who refuse to opt in. But I think our job is just to say, like, I'd love for you to come along with me. Here's how it looks. And that change is often just kind of self-actualization and becoming who we really are. And the thing that I know about people is the more that we are who we really are, the easier it is for people to know if there are people or not.
Exactly.
What's interesting is, like, most people love and revere the most are pretty unique, right? They just are who they are, and they're kind of unapologetic about it. And so when we are that person, it makes it easy for people to know where they stand. Whereas if we do the chameleon thing our whole life, people are still guessing about us, right? They're like, I never really know, because it never really feels authentic.
Right. And I would prefer that. I'm a type A, black and white. If I show you who I am and that isn't your cup of tea, I have a little saying, I'm not everybody's cup of tea, but I'm somebody's gin and tonic, because that's my favorite.
I like it. Yeah.
But that's true. I would much rather you look right at me, because of the wounds I had from people who were supposed to love me, and that rejection, and them telling me I'd never be enough, or making me feel imposter. When I am authentic to someone, I would much prefer that you say right now, you know what, I can't handle that, and God bless you, go with God. Because when I have driven people off because I jump right in. I love you quickly. I consider you my friend. And I've had an episode, a little revelation with the Holy Spirit at the beginning of this year, about the terminology we use for relationships. And we so quickly call somebody friend And if you go by the technical definition of a friend, they may not be. They're just somebody you met. That doesn't make them your friend or you theirs. So it's been a very interesting relationship year for me, and especially with the books coming out and my growth. I mean, I'm 63 years old. Bob told me to start my podcast to go along with the writing of my book at 60. So I have people around me in my age group who are just acting like they're on the downhill slide to death or something. I just don't know what. And it's not like I'm climbing Mount Everest or doing something crazy, but come on, get excited. Come along with the trip. What do you want to do? And I'm all in for you. You know, if you want to do stand-up comedy, I'll be in the front row and you can pick on me like Don Rickles. I don't care.
I like that.
But yeah, you're right. I people will show quickly when you're authentic whether or not they can handle it, and I appreciate that. To be honest with you, I don't get mad at them. I'm like, thank you, because that's honest. The lying for me throughout my lifetime has been worse than even somebody not loving me or not. You know what I mean? Because love lost its potency when I was young. Now integrity and trust and being able to believe you, because every man in the full line of men from my first date to my ex-husband cheated on me and lied to me. So that's a huge for me, and I appreciate it, and I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I think most people can accept the truth, right? As difficult or messy as it might be, far easier than ambiguity or lack of authenticity. And the thing that I see so often is, yeah, if you are who you are, there's something really healing about that. Because if we consider like attachment wounds, what really is an attachment wound? It's an unmet need and expectation, right? And so what we're lacking is congruence, and the congruence is what I should have gotten and what I got, right? And so there's a discrepancy. That's the same thing with relationships. Are we advertising who we are and then being the person? And there's something really healing when those two are the same thing. And there's something that re-injures us when they're not.
Ooh,
Right. And so that's what we're going
yeah.
for. It's just, is it one and the same?
That's a great way to put it. And I have to say that as things have shaken out, both with my divorce, I had a church change in there, and just the different relationships, whatever layer they might be, it's shaken out. And they say as you get older that you're not, if you have 100 friends, are you really serving any of them well, and vice versa? You know what I mean? A couple of really good, deep relationships, and there's a couple of folks, and I have several friends,
Okay. Glad to hear it. Good for you.
but there's a couple who are genuinely just like, do not care what the world around them is saying and what's going. They are just authentically themselves, and that comes with some very interesting things, but that makes them so cool. I love being around them because there's just no time for this being offended about everything, or getting offended because I'm a smart aleck and my humor isn't everybody's thing, but these guys are like, yeah, but you take me with all my weirdness, so here we are.
Well, and those are the people we love, right? Is the people who just, what you see is what you get.
Yes, and it'd be great if we could be a little more like that. I think sometimes with all the advent of social media and different things, people feel like they have to put something forward to be accepted. And if they only understood, there's a meme that's rolling around out there, and I don't know who originally said it, but other people don't think about us nearly as much as we think about them thinking about us.
Right.
And so I don't use filters. I don't zoom in on my wrinkles on social media. But everything I put out there is genuinely, and especially over the last couple of years as my healing journey has progressed, real. And that's what I want. I follow this. I think he might not be a pastor, he's just a believer, but he said something the other day that has really resonated with me. If somebody followed me around all day, would they see Jesus? And that is ultimately my goal. I mean, we are left here after salvation for that exact purpose. So that is like the joyride for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just that congruence is like that. That's the people we respect. is the people that do that.
Yeah. Okay, young man, this has been fun. I didn't get all the way through the book, but I got a lot of the way. When I first started the podcast, I tried to read the whole book for everybody who came on, and man, is that exhausting. I couldn't keep up. But this has been great. One of the things I do with every one of my guests is I ask them for their nugget. What is the one thing that you wish you knew or someone had told you sooner?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just kind of to build on what we've been talking about, which is, what I wish I had known sooner was that you are who you are, and the sooner you make peace with that, the easier life gets. I
Amen.
think I spent a lot of time trying out for other parts and trying to be other people, and I even got pretty good at it. But at the end of the day, I think true contentment and happiness comes from being who God made us to be. And so I think if childhood goes right and we get what we need, we just inherently know that. But I think if there's some wounds there, we sometimes miss that lesson. And so I would just say the thing that I help people with most, that I think is most impactful, is know who you are and who you aren't. And there is never a bad thing to investing some time in figuring that out, because when you know that and you can love the person you are, everybody else can love that person too. It makes it easy.
Right.
But if you are unsure about you, it's tough for other people to show up and know what to give you, because they don't know what you need, because you don't know what you need.
Right. And we put those false expectations on them and us. And when we're being somebody we're not, it's lying. That's just the reality of it. And when you lie, you have to keep track. And that's exhausting. I've never been good at that. I don't have a poker face to my chagrin and those around me.
Yeah, I'm not great at it either. Yeah, you kind of know what I think without me saying it. Yep.
So, that's another like attraction or not for me, probably with people is that, I'm not blunt and I'm not mean and I don't try to hurt people, but it is sometimes it can be a physical strain to not let my face show what I'm thinking about something that's just happened. I'm like one of those people. Did you ever watch Seinfeld?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
The Pez dispenser on Elaine's. Yeah.
Yeah, it's expressive, but I love that, and so that's like, well, if that's you, be you, right? So I always think, and I know it's cliche, but like, I just imagine God giving us this beautiful gift when we're born of like, this is who you are,
Mm.
and then I imagine sometimes we reject that
Ooh,
and we just say no thanks, and what that must look like, feel like, be like, and so I just go like, what if we just received that gift? Like, wouldn't the world be a better place?
right. And why not from our creator? Do you know what I mean? We're looking everywhere else for some kind of validation or some kind of understanding. And I feel like once we do step into that, I never, as a child, wanted to be an author. And I don't know that author is the gift or the title he's giving me. He wants me to tell my story. But I think stepping into being the daughter that he designed me to be, whatever that includes in my universe, has been the most freeing thing that you talk about setting the captives free. Isaiah 61 is, that's the foreword in my book, the second book, because I let it be written by my king. And yeah, that's awesome. I love that. So this has been delightful. I could talk to you all day long.
Yeah, well, I've enjoyed it. This has been great.
And I love that Bob wrote your forward and stuff and that you know one another. He and Kimberly are so precious to me. And I know my listeners probably get sick of me talking about it. But they were great coaches and so supportive and inspirational and he's a 7 too. So he and I are like ping pong balls.
You get it. No, Bob and Kimberly both, I mean, they're amazing people. A lot's been said about how wonderful they are, but just personally been so impactful in my story. They've made all the difference. So yeah, I'm so grateful for them too.
Yeah, they are friends for life. I would like to meet them in person at some point, but they genuinely, to me, and I've seen them in other I don't even know what formats, and they are who they are. There's no lack of authenticity. Yeah. want to thank you for coming to class today. This has been so fun for me, and I would love to go have a session with Jason, as you probably could surmise from all my questions and kind of leaning into some of the things that I'm working on personally. It was great. I highly recommend you get his book, Get Past Your Past. The connection information and everything will be in the show notes. If you like what's going on here at Old School, if you can click subscribe, hit the bell, whatever you need to do, engage, ask questions. I would love to hear from you, and I would love to know what you think is going well and what you might like to see. So, thank you for coming to class today, and class dismissed.